Okay, my name is Daryl Ross. I'm a member of the Sishat First Nation. I work for the Sishat First Nation.
My name is Tom Happynook. My traditional name is Hop-in-Yuk. Hop-in-Yuk was anglicized to Happynook. So I consider that to be quite fortunate that it wasn't butchered too badly. I am the head hereditary whaling chief of the Huu-ay-aht First Nations.
I'm Wickenish, Cliff Atleo. Sit in a house of Ironshire at home in a house of Fluckish our Thai is Mukuna. Our second chief is Tluckish Weha. So we have three principal chiefs. And I was born and raised in a house. Went to school in Port Alberta from age 10 to 16, 17. Grew up as a fisherman.
The oral history is so important to us. It's, there's, a lot of people call them, they don't call them as oral history, as true oral history, but I think when you look at, when we finalize that research, I think we're going to be very truthful, I think, in a lot of them.
Always the stories we had purpose, or lessons, life lessons.
Tsunamis are an actual part of our society before contact. And there's a scientific connection and there's an oral history connection to those stories.
So we have a story, a history of a tsunami that took place in the 1700s. It was a big tsunami, came in and actually wiped out the entire Nuu-chah-nulth tribe at Pachina Bay. The tidal wave came into the bay and just completely eliminated them all. And so the tribe that inhabited that territory were no longer there. That particular territory was given to my grandma's sister, who was marrying the head chief of our nation, of Huu-ay-aht First Nations, and she came with the dowry, with the Nuu-chah-nulth territory in her dowry when she got married. So the ownership of this particular area continued on, even though the tribe that lived there was completely eliminated by the tsunami. So we do know the story, we do know the history of that tsunami, and it was interesting because no one kind of believed our historical account of what happened until researchers went to Japan, where it was documented, because the tsunami also went to Japan, and it was documented and it lined up with our story at the time and everything, and so all of a sudden our legends, our myths, became truth, and I always found that interesting. I think one of the important pieces is to recognize that there is truth in our stories and in our legends and in our histories that needs to be accepted by Western society and not questioned all the time. And the example of them acknowledging our history about the tsunami in the 1700s only after they had found written documentation in Japan about the same tsunami. So then our legend, our story had truth to it. So being able to accept that, these aren't just fictional stories or non-fictional or whatever it is, but are based in fact.
There is one that it's told in one of our history books that we've done with Sishat, and it talks about it was post-flood era. These two strangers, they drifted ashore and they had different names, they spoke a different language, and they ended up living with the Sishats. and they formed their own family unit that was highly regarded in the tribe. That they managed to get a higher status over time with that family. Our archaeologist that was doing research with us, he kind of estimated it might have been connected with the Japanese story from the 1700s. He said the time frame could be very similar to that event. But our people measured history I think they measured history by tsunami. If you look at some of our flood stories, they talk about the spiritual respect, that was done during those stories, and the respect that we have for that. But then over time, you look at the oral histories of the Sishat people, which goes back, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years as far as we can go. There's probably 5 that I can name that were tsunami stories or great flood stories. If you read the science one, they say they estimate there were 7 in the last 3,500 years. And I was just talking to one of my buddies that I worked with for the Tribal Council in the 80s, and he said the late Moses Smith, who was one of the key historians of the northern Nuu-chah-nulth, before his death, he was telling him that there was 6. So there's 6 in their oral history, and there's 4 or 5 that I can name of in the Sishat oral history. So there's some consistency between science and in our oral histories.
We also have a story about, so the Huayat First Nations is an amalgamation of tribes that inhabited the eastern portion of Barkley Sound. We became the Huayat First Nations. There's a story where the Great Flood, many generations ago, the big flood that we all hear about, we landed at Hue. When the flood receded, we ended up at Hue, which is a place name, and it's a spot on Diana Island in the Deer Group Islands, and its name is Hue, and that's where and it means where we turned our canoes upside down to dry them out after the big flood. And that's how we got our namesake, our contemporary namesake that we use today.
Science observes sometimes animal behavior that we always did. Dog sits up, they know something is there. We don't hear anything, but they've heard it. And so when there's an earthquake coming, animals respond the same way. Every time there's an earthquake, people tell stories about that the animals know first because they hear. And so when you have this thought process of understanding the interconnectedness of everything, you don't disbelieve the reaction of the animal. What you do is observe and learn what they're reacting to or responding to, which is what our people did.
And then in 1964, yes, I was 6 years old, and a tsunami came and hit Mamfield and went up the Alberni Inlet and took out a portion of Port Alberni. And we were just coming home on our boat in the Bamfield Inlet, and the Bamfield Inlet cuts back in towards the open ocean. So when the tsunami came in, we didn't get the full wave, we just got the flooding. And we were just going in our house and got home, and just a few minutes later, the water came right in our house, kind of washed the floor, and then receded, and then came back again one more time, washed the floor, and then receded, and then it was over. But it had taken our dock and our fish boat and had broken it loose from its moorings. And so our wharf and our fishing boat were out floating in the inlet that we had to go paddle out and try and bring back to its place.